All right, I think we're live. Good evening, everybody. No viewers at the moment, but that means we can get cracked on with it. So I'm just going to hang around for a moment and do a little bit of setup while we see if anyone comes and joins us, and then we'll get going from there. So while I'm busy doing some setup, local news this week is the town just the other side of the mountain where I live here in Wales is in local lockdown from 6 p.m. tomorrow night. What does that mean? The regulations basically is people aren't allowed to meet indoors, and we're not allowed to travel to and from the area without good cause. There may be more to it than that as well. But yeah, that's the news. So yeah, it's an interesting times. I don't know whether we're going to go into local lockdown here or not. I really don't know. As far as I know, they're not concerned about the town where I live, but you never know. But anyway, yes, there we go. Slightly different camera angle tonight. I think next week I'm going to move the camera a bit, as we're spending more time, me with my head down, actually working in Visual Studio Code. I think this camera angle's not so great, but we're going to give this a go for another week. Hello, and welcome. Welcome to live stream number 2. It's our second live stream. Those of you who didn't see it last week can go and catch up on our YouTube channel. Hello from Wales. From the valleys. I don't have a Welsh accent at all, I'm afraid, as I'm actually from Yorkshire. I'm a long way from home here, but it's a wonderful part of the world. So it would be awesome if you're watching this live, or if you're watching this on catch up, please leave a comment. Let us know where you're watching from. I'd love to know who these videos are reaching. It'd be really wonderful. We currently have just the one viewer live. Hello, whoever you are. I have tried to tweak the stream this week, so if this does become interactive, hopefully the comments will appear here. So I'm looking down at where the laptop screen where the comments will appear, you see. Hopefully the comments will appear here a lot quicker. So fingers crossed. But I don't know how interactive this one's going to be. So what am I covering tonight? Well, oh, hey Sam. Good to see you. Last week's live stream, I ended up by saying I was going to take the requirements capturing away and do that in between, because I was worried it would be very boring for viewers to watch. And I got some feedback after the stream, and it was suggested that perhaps seeing how requirements are captured is something people might want to see. They might want to see the process rather than have requirements just delivered to them. Having requirements delivered to them, I guess, is a bit too much like a regular software engineer's day job. So that's what tonight's going to be. We're going to be writing some stories. And I'm going to take you through my process for capturing requirements. I've been using a version of this on and off since 2007. Don't know where I originally got it from. There was a very mad Dutchman who spent a lot of time schooling me in requirements when I worked at Orange, best part of 2 decades ago now. So it's possible this is the system he was trying to get me to use and work within. I don't remember, it's too long ago. But I'll walk you through my process. And this process is designed to map onto agile style project management. I'm not going to claim it's agile with a capital A or anything like that. Personally, my experience, your people are more important than your process. I've had great success with agile style processes. I've also had great success with Prince2 style processes. Too many S's going on there, I think. So for me, these requirements are designed to fit in whatever delivery process you might want, whether it's sprints, whether it's Kanban, whether you want to do the Basecamp style shape up process where you takes about 6 weeks to tackle things. Doesn't matter. It'll fit into any of those just fine. So I'm going to walk you through that and break it all down for you. We're going to talk about functional domains, how I approach working out what epics are inside there, and we're actually going to write some stories as part of this. Now, what's my next slide? There aren't many slides tonight. It's not like last week. Okay, yeah, right. So I want to start off with the question, and we'll see how quickly the comments come through on this one, in case any viewers want to answer this. But why do we capture requirements? Why do we write things down? For me, it's about this. Let me get this slide up. There's this common belief in software engineering and project management that it's sometimes known as the iron triangle. You can pick any two of these. You can have something that's fast and good, but you're going to pay for it. You can have something that's fast and cheap, but the quality will suck. Or you can have something that's good and cheap, but you'll take forever to get it. And let me see if I can... right, let me move the mouse pointer into the middle of the screen. I don't know if the mouse pointer is showing up in the video. It might not be. But I believe requirements help you start to get a bit more of an overlap between all three of these. At the end of the day, what do requirements do? Requirements are there to be the skeleton that you hang everything off. The project plan's job is to deliver the requirements. Testing's job is to prove the requirements have been met. Obviously, as developers and those of you who do sysadmin or work in a more DevOpsy type environment, your job is to do the work to make the requirements realized, to make them happen. Excuse me. But if you've got a team of people, how do they know what things are supposed to happen? What they're supposed to know what's to work on? Now, the agile approach is about better communication at its heart, and a lot of the ways agile encourages that is by cutting out layers of communication. If you need to know something, you go to the source of it. I was going to say the fountain of knowledge, but that's not quite what I mean. You go to the source. You don't play a game of what we would sometimes call Chinese whispers. Excuse the term. There's probably a more acceptable term for it that I don't know. Just this I think the Americans may call it telephone, where messages that are passed on down and down and down. I'm gesturing a lot, so let me go for this. This is a lot easier. As messages are passed down and down and down the chain, they get diluted, their meaning gets distorted, and no one's to blame for this. It's just what happens when you've got a chain of communication. So one of the ways Agile encourages better software delivery faster is by cutting down the amount of communication. Now that's all well and good if you're all in the same room, in the same time zone. But what if you're not? What if you're working asynchronously? What if your expert user, the people who can answer your questions, have very limited time available? And what if you're blocked because you don't have that information? That is one of the areas where good old-fashioned requirements come in. Another reason for writing down requirements is to avoid repetition. One of the things we do with requirements is we capture supporting information about it, something we'll probably be doing tonight. So that as questions arise and we answer them, we capture those questions, we capture the answers, so anyone else can come in and they can see that body of knowledge already growing. And we capture that information attached to the requirement itself. Now, people may say, but what about, for example, Jira? Nearly everyone uses Jira. I'm just trying Tesco's chicken soup for the first time. It's surprisingly nice. It's better than the one I've been getting from Sainsbury's, that's for sure. I think that's going to become a regular, that. Anyway, that's a tangent. So, some people who have only ever worked in an agile environment may be used to their Jira board and their Jira backlog being your only record of requirements. What happens over the months and the years as work gets delivered, but your product continues to exist and continues to evolve? What happens, in my experience anyway, is those tickets on the Jira board disappear, and it's not a repository of knowledge. It's a repository of tasks that have been done. There needs to be that repository of knowledge. And that's what requirements are all about. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So before I go on and actually start pulling together some requirements, anyone watching have any questions? I still have no idea what the latency is like for comments, so I don't know how long to leave that before moving on. Still learning. It's only live stream number 2. Right. Well, what we'll do, one moment, is we'll sit down and we'll write some requirements, and we'll work on that tonight. So it's about 7:30, give or take. So I've actually changed the slide and you can't see the slides. That's me being silly. One moment. There we go. Right. So let's go and do some writing. About a minute, Sam reckons, with the lag. Okay, I'm going to see what I can do about that again next week. I'll try and make some time. I didn't have time last week, and I'll show you why in a moment. So, requirements. I am going to shift to my laptop. Now, before we actually start pulling apart the GitHub extension and creating some requirements for it, let me show you something. Okay, right, so what we've got here, let me scroll up to the top. I spent the weekend bootstrapping a new tool. And what this tool will do is allow me to capture requirements and compile them into a single HTML file. I'm calling it Story Tracker. It's going to be open source. It's going to be published eventually. This right now, I've barely just got something that's working for tonight. Now the reason I've built this tool is in the past I would capture requirements using Microsoft Word. There's a lot of advantages to Microsoft Word, it has to be said. But there's 2 reasons I don't want to use that for this project. First of all, this is an open source project, and I'm developing on Linux, which is my preferred dev environment, because things like Docker simply work. On Linux, things seem to work really well if you're doing dev, and the kind of dev I'm doing. But Microsoft Word requires a license, and I don't want people to have a Word license in order to ever contribute to this project. And the second thing is, by creating a little tool to do this, a little story tracker tool, we've got the requirements as structured data rather than just text inside MS Word. And that may open up some interesting possibilities down the road. It depends how much time I put into this tool. At this stage, I don't know. So coming back to the screen, a full document would normally have a cover page. It would normally have some blurb at the beginning explaining the document, putting it and the project into context. At this moment in time, Story Tracker doesn't import all of that, so that's a feature I've got to add. But the two main features are working. The first thing is a glossary. Anyone who's joined a project that's been worked on by an existing team, there's jargon, for lack of a better phrase. There are people who communicate in shorthand. They will talk about something and assume everybody else already knows what that is, which is not always the case. And if you're someone new joining a project, this domain-specific language, this jargon, is something you've got to learn. So one of the things I do in my requirements documents is I capture these in a glossary table. And they tend to fall in four categories. They tend to be actors. And I use an actor to refer to an interaction with humans. It might be a particular person. It's normally a role. For example, a sysadmin. In Gitflow extensions terms, it's mostly going to be... Sorry, my eyes are a bit dry tonight. In Gitflow Gitflow extension terms, it's mostly going to be developers who are using Git. There may not be many other actors. We'll see. But they're the main one there. It's that kind of thing. And it's useful to have those people because those are the people you're writing the tool for. And you've got to think about those people as you design the tool. You've got to think of how they're going to interact with the tool, the product, the SaaS service, whatever you're building. Next up, we have entities. And these are going to be record types. They don't often end up in glossaries, but when they do, they'll be key records. For example, in the Gitflow extension, one entity I imagine we're going to have is the Git config, because that's something we're going to have to interact with from a software point of view in order to store some settings. Features can end up in the glossary as well. So Gitflow itself would probably end up in there to describe the branching model as a whole, that kind of thing. They don't normally, we've got requirements later on. We've got domains, we've got epics, and we've got stories where we'll actually document our features. So this in the glossary tends to be high level concepts, and we'll see if we get any. And then finally, we've got systems. Those are other computer software that whatever you're speccing out has to interact with. In this case, it's going to be the Git hosting. It's going to be one of the systems we're going to deal with, like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and anything else out there that people are using that I'm not aware of. Another system that we interact with is going to be the Git binary itself. That is an external system that the Gitflow extension has to interact with. So those are two entries we're going to put in. So they'll get, and they go. All they do is they go into a little glossary table. Excuse me. Now, very simple. We put the term. We say what type of glossary entry it is, and we provide a simple definition. Story Tracker will eventually be able to turn these into clickable links where you'll be able to click through and read a lot more, where you'll be able to write up a lot more detail about glossary entries. Let me show you the kind of thing I mean. Right, one moment. Right. Let's see if I can remember the URL. Yes. Okay. So, what I built here, what you're looking at here, safely typed is something I've not really publicized at all. I've been looking at a way to use TypeScript to solve a lot of robustness problems, to make it hard to write code that will crash at runtime. Can't make it impossible, but to make it hard. As part of that, I wrote up some coding standards to guide the safely typed approach. And also I wrote a glossary. And it's the glossary I want to show you tonight to show you what I mean. So for example, let me pick something. I'm trying to think of something that's got a decent sized write-up. Let's try this. Okay. So this is the kind of extra information we might want to put in a requirements glossary later on. And that's quite small, but it's got some code examples there, for example. Let me find something bigger. Let's try something like a data guarantee. Is that bigger? Not really. So, but the idea is 1 or 2 sentences probably isn't enough, especially for people coming onto the project or people who are just dipping in and out where they work in other things. So what we want to do with a glossary is we want to be able to expand on it and make sure enough information is there for people to be able to get going. So that's what's going to come. We're not going to be able to do any of that tonight because we can't render it, but we'll be adding that in future weeks. All right, so back to requirements. It's a shame this doesn't yet generate a table of contents because it would help me show you the breakdown much easier. The breakdown I've got is domains down to epics down to down to stories. A domain is a group of features that logically belong together. And we're going to go through that. We're going to try and discover those with the Gitflow extension and write some of those up tonight. What you're looking at here is an example domain that I was using while developing Story Tracker last night. So it would actually, I had some test data to render with it. Then you get the epic itself. So domains get an ID, epics get an ID, and domains have 1 or more epics. Now what's an epic? At heart, an epic is a group of stories that kind of live or die together, for lack of a better phrase. If I was scheduling some work, I would normally be making sure a whole epic is done in one go. The idea here is that the individual stories, that feature only works once the whole epic's done. Is the idea, is the guiding thing there. So, for example, this is a very draft epic describing a glossary entry. This is Story Tracker's own requirements that I was messing about with last night. So, the epic gets an ID and it gets a title, and then each epic gets a description. We set the scene for people. So, this is all meant to be at a glance stuff. It's not meant to be detailed at this point, so it's normally 1, maybe 2 paragraphs tops at this point. And then we get down to our stories. And you can see here the ID scheme continues down. And each story is normally 1 or 2 sentences. And it is a requirement to be met. It may be a feature that users can see. It may be a technical requirement. For example, what I've highlighted on the screen here is one of the, I've said earlier with Story Tracker, it's about getting structured data. So I've put a requirement in there to say there's going to be a structured record of some time to describe a glossary entry for Story Tracker. We don't say how to implement that. There's no why in there at the minute, but I'll come to that in a moment. We simply say what must be there. That's the requirement. The next requirement, for example, we introduce the type column for glossary entries or glossary terms to say they'll be categorized and we're going to call it a type. So all we've got to do is really simple stuff. And then I talk about something called the long form write-up, the idea of being able to as I showed earlier, click through and see more detail about each glossary entry. And stories, we keep the stories that simple. They don't need to be more, at the high level sort of description of them, they don't need to be more than that. If you work in a BDD environment, your BDD tests are how the story is implemented at that moment in time, because they're exercising the system under test. You know, their acceptance test normally. Sorry, I just had a pop-up over here. Let me close that. Right, this, yeah, I can wait for later. Right then. Where was I? Oh, yes. Your BDD tests. Your BDD tests aren't the requirements. There's an important distinction. The requirements are this document, or this structured data set that we're going to build. Very important. Your BDD tests are showing how the requirement has been met and whether it has been met or not. So again, your BDD tests hang off the requirements. Now, very quickly, moving down. Assumptions. I talked about this last week. Assumptions are where the devil's in the detail. Very much so. We want to find them. We want to document them so that there's no surprises. We don't want anybody on any project going off in one direction and it be the wrong direction because they didn't know about something that someone else was assuming. Then we track a whole host of other things. And at the moment, this very rough version of Story Tracker doesn't have structured records for and doesn't render. When we write a requirement, it may affect another requirement, so we want to track that. There may be guidance for people about what's in scope and what's out of scope for implementing this particular epic. So we want to capture those. The actors that interact with the epic, we want to know who they are. Stakeholders. Oops, one moment. Stakeholders are important. We want to know who's asked for this. We want to know who's got to approve it and accept it as well. That's why it's called stakeholders and not owners. Owners is just, who's asked for this feature, but just because someone's asked for it doesn't mean that someone else doesn't have to sign off delivery, for example. So we want to know who those are, and we want those to be listed. And we want to know which tasks, which epics this epic relies upon. So when it comes to tackling things, we don't want to tackle something too early before it can be done. Now at the minute, you can see here, all these columns, all these features here say to be done. They currently don't render in Story Tracker. I'm going to be chipping away at the code during the week on my evenings, and hopefully by next week we'll be able to populate some of these. No promises, we'll see how it goes. Now, the other thing I'm doing here is I've got notes for each of these stories. So here eventually they'll click through to here, so we can capture some notes. For example, the record structure, we can capture that here. So that's the basics of domains. Domains are our feature groups. Our epics are effectively our features, and then stories are the moving parts that make up the feature. And what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to look at the existing Hubflow code, and I'm going to start writing these requirements up. Now it has to be said, the Hubflow, the Gitflow extension that we've already got, makes things easy for us. we've already determined that our overriding goal from our OKRs from last week, our objectives and our key results, is we're going to be bringing these features forward into Golang, all the portable features, and we're going to the features that GitHub specific we're going to lose for the moment. We're not having to go out at this stage and interview users and understand what it should do. What it does is already defined for us. We just want to capture it, which makes things a lot easier. So what I've got over here, yep, that's showing up. Hopefully the fonts are large enough. If not, please shout and I will experiment with my setup. Right, so what I've got here, you're looking at Visual Studio Code. I'm going to leave this camera on all the time unless it gets in the way of the files I'm working on, at which point shout out. So Visual Studio Code, and what we've got here on the left hand side, I've got two folders added to the workspace. The Gitflow folder is going to be the new code we're working on. And Gitflow old is the existing shell-based extension. Now, let's talk about this. There is a debate that what we should be doing, because we're going to fall back to the shell scripts in the short term when we write our CLI skeleton in Go. There's an argument that we should be forking the old Gitflow repo. We should be adding our new code to that repo rather than starting a new repo. Even though we're intending to erase all of this old code. There's an argument that that's what we should be doing. I haven't made a decision yet. I'm not going to make that decision tonight. I actually need to go away and think about it and see how I feel about that. There are some reasons for starting a brand new repo. But they may not, it may be more important to keep that continuity. I don't know. Got to go away and think about it. So for tonight, we're working in two folders, and nothing's actually going to get back onto GitHub tonight with this stuff. We're going to have to sort out our destination where this is going to go before I can push the code up. I won't be doing that tonight. Right then. So on the left here, we've got our existing extension, and at the top we've got our new stuff, and we've got our requirements folder, and here's the structured data we've been editing. And so the HTML I've just shown you is built from these markdown files, and what they do. Requirements. These are our domains, and what I've done is for the minute, because I'm not using a database or anything like that, I'm just using YAML front matter to store structured data, and then everything after that, the markup, what I'm calling long form write up, is where we put the notes about domains, about epics, and about features, about stories. Keep calling them features, I mean stories. That's what we're going to do. So, if I switch over to my terminal, let's clear that. Right. If I do get HF help, fingers crossed it's installed. Yes, it is. Excuse me. Right, what have we got here? So the way the Git commands are structured is almost our domain set. We could certainly start with this and see how we go. We can take each of these sub-commands here, init, feature, release, hotfix, push, pull, update, and version. Excuse me. And we could happily say that each of these is one of our domains. I'm not going to do that, but we could if we want. If someone else did do that, that would be perfectly understandable. Now the reason I'm not going to do that is because these are all the portable commands. And I think what we want to do is we want to leave space in space to add other features in the future. Well, these are the CLI commands, first of all. So I think we want to leave space in the future to add more requirements longer term. We've talked about the APIs, one of our stretch goals. Once this particular project is done and we're up and running full-time in Go, we may then want to start adding new features that are nothing to do, that are not portable. So we want to make some space for ourselves. So what I'm going to do, and the other thing to remember with requirements, especially in the early drafts, is restructuring them is normal. Until you start adding version numbers to drafts, it doesn't matter if you start renaming and renumbering things. Once you've published a set of requirements and stuck a version number on it, the IDs should then become immutable once you start to share it. But at this stage where you're just drafting the requirements, there's nothing wrong with restructuring things whenever you want. And on that note, you'll notice here it says requirements Gitflow ext for Gitflow extension. In the folder structure that I'm populating, I've left some space so that we can have more than one requirements document in the future. If I was writing if I was doing the business analyst capturing requirements for, say, software as a service, there'd be multiple requirements documents. The old-fashioned way, if you like, I say normally people don't write requirements, but the old school way of doing this is you'd split them up into functional and non-functional requirements. Now, because we're building a CLI tool, at the minute it doesn't feel like we need that distinction. But again, with the folder structure, I've left some space, so if we have more requirements in the future, as the project goes on, we've got somewhere to put them. That's the idea. So I'm going to start with the glossary and the glossary terms. And I'm grabbing stuff that I made yesterday and I'm going to rewrite it, rename it. Right. So git binary. Now each of these fields are going to be rendered through Markdown. So I'm using Markdown notation here. So for example here, I've put these in single quotes so that when I generate the HTML document from these notes, that should appear as a code block, an inline code block in the results. Fingers crossed. So we've got git binary. We're going to rename this one. Like I say, I'm just grabbing my example files to get started with. Eventually there'll be a Yeoman generator, so we can easily generate new files, so you don't have to remember the structure. But that's down the road. It's not now. So we've got the git binary. We've got the Git Hosting. And I'll regenerate the glossary as soon as I've done these, just so we can see it populate and see whether or not Story Tracker actually runs. Alright then, so possibly remote system. And then down here, we're going to stick some examples. I think it's heading 4 is what I've got to use. I can't remember, and it's, like I say, Story Tracker's at a very early stage, so obviously it's still in flux. So I'm actually just going to put here, so examples of Git hosting. systems are so we've got GitHub, GitLab, which I really need to spin GitLab up locally and have a play with it. I haven't used it for years. Bitbucket. Anything else out there we don't know about that supports the protocol? Right, so I am going to stick a heading in here because I'm not sure what will render. Right, there we go. So what else have we got? We have a feature which I'm going to do, so let me grab that. So we've got the legacy Gitflow extension, the old shell scripts. And this is a good point for me to change the type to be system there. Git binary system, that's good. So, because we're actually going to be interacting with this, so it should really have because it's our fallback, so it really should have a glossary entry. I don't need any notes about that for now, so that's good. We're going to take this, we're going to rename this to a developer. There we go. Right, I'm going to have a go at generating this and see what happens. Where am I? Oh, quick word about my prompt. Hopefully the prompt makes it very clear what I'm doing. I've redesigned this recently for live streams. I shot a video 3-4 weeks ago now, showing people how to get started with K3S. And it was all me on the terminal, and I had to scrap it. And I had to scrap it because the standard terminal prompts we have on Ubuntu, which is what you're looking at here, it's heavily customized, but it is Ubuntu. It's really hard to follow those in a video. So I've sat down, I've tried to put together a terminal prompt that makes it a lot easier to see the divisions between commands, and also to see, especially if you're jumping in and out of virtual machines using Vagrant and VirtualBox, able to see which box you're on as well. So as we go through this, hopefully this will prove very useful. But any feedback on the terminal is much appreciated. Right then. Right then. Hopefully. Yes, it didn't crash. Didn't crash is good. So now, if I reload this, we've got our glossary. So we can see that the definitions didn't go through Markdown, so that's something I need to go away and fix. I'm going to fix that. That's a bug. I want those to work so that we can use Markdown notation there. But we can see we're starting to build out our glossary table. So we've got 4 important things there. We've got our developer. We've got the Git binary. We've got the Git hosting, I should say Git hosting platform, I think. Let me change that. Git hosting platform. I feel better about that. Platform or provider? Should it say Git hosting provider? We're not interacting with the provider. We're interacting with the platform. If you're running your own GitLab, you're the provider, but GitLab's still the platform. So for now, I'm going to go with platform. And when you're writing requirements and capturing the glossary and things like that, language starts to matter. My old teacher used to say that language defines who we are. The language we use, the way we use it, defines who we are. Because we think, most of us think in language. We think out loud in language. We think to ourselves up here. And it's the language we use that defines who we are. So you'll see me mess about with language quite a bit with requirements. Anytime I'm writing, but certainly with requirements. Because they're also setting the scene for the future as well. Right, let me recompile that. There we go, Git Hosting Platform. There we go. And we've got the legacy Gitflow extension in there as well. And we're going to leave a glossary table there. We've done the obvious ones. And as we work through some requirements, we will add more glossary entries as and when they seem to crop up. Hopefully it will be quite a natural process, and we'll see how we do. Okay. How are we doing for viewers? We've got 2 viewers. Hello. Hello, both of you. Hello. Hello. And hello to everybody who watches this on catch-up. If memory serves, I didn't look closely at the stats, but I think something like 30-35 people watched the last week's stream, the first stream. They watched it on catch-up, which is awesome. It's a good start. I'm going to see if we can push that every week. And I should do the standard YouTuber thing. Please remember to like the video. Please remember to subscribe and to ring the sodding bell. Because YouTube can't write a notification system that works reliably for toffee. There, I've said it. Right, that's all I'm going to say about like, comment, subscribe, and all the rest of it. Please do that. The more people interact with the video, especially on catch up, the more it will help YouTube promote this to other people who might benefit from this but currently don't know it exists. And please do spread the word. Please do tweet about it, or if you're on Facebook, please share links on Facebook. Let people know this stuff's going on. Even if we get no viewers, I'm going to be doing this anyway because I want this tool for myself. But if we can build an audience and turn this interactive every week, and we get many eyes on the project, the quality will be better. I've never ever worked with somebody who couldn't make my code better. Every single developer I have worked with in a team over my entire career was, a second pair of eyes, always able to help me make my work better. And if the more people we can get on the live streams, or watching on catch up and then going to the GitHub repository afterwards, the better we can make this tool for everybody. There, pitch over. Back to technical stuff, which is much nicer. So we'll leave the glossary alone for now. Let's close those. Close all. There we go. Right then. Some requirements. I'm going to create these. So I'm going to take all the portable features and treat them as a single functional domain. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab this. I'm not renaming the existing files for the example files for now. I'm going to delete those in a moment. I'm just going to grab from them for the moment. New file, index.md, title, portable features. Right. It's a good idea for every functional domain to set the scene. And that's what this introduction is about. Ooh, we've got a glossary entry. I mean, this tool is implementing the Gitflow branching model. We really should have a glossary entry for it. what is it? It's definitely not an entity. It's definitely not a feature. And it's definitely not an actor. But is it really a system? I think this is a process. And I'm going to use that as my write-up. A way of using Git that balances isolating work streams with collaboration. It's probably a better write-up, but off the top of my head, we can come back and polish our words later on, and we will do that. We'll always be polishing, but it's best not to have something left blank. That's the worst thing, so avoiding leaving things blank. Right then. Right, so the Gitflow. So I'm changing the language I'm doing here. So I'm writing up a description, an introduction to what the portable features domain is. And what I'm looking to use here is something called active language. Now, if memory serves, sorry. Is this the right one? Let's see if this is the right page. Yeah, accept all cookies. Yeah. Right. Here we go. I think this is the page I want to share with you. So I have done work for the government in 2015 and 2016, UK government. I was part of the team that worked on the MOT refresh. That was a huge project. There was over 50 of us on the project, so I played quite a small part on that. But that got me into more regular contact, not with GDS themselves. Have met some GDS people through that, but they weren't involved in the project every day to day. But what we did was come into contact, if you like, with GDS's legacy. And that is best described as trying to make digital services accessible to a wider range of people. I think that's their main legacy. I talk about them like they're done. Apologies to anyone I know at GDS who's watching this, if you don't feel that's quite fair. But what came from that is the language we use and the way we structure our words has a big impact on how many people can actually get into what we're doing. Writing styles can be a barrier to entry. We want to improve accessibility. And for requirements, because it's mostly written word, the style of prose, our writing style, is our main accessibility barrier at this moment in time. Forgetting the tools, forgetting the HTML and how well it works for people with screen readers, etc. That I don't want to diminish that problem. It's just that that's the problem we're not dealing with right now. We're dealing with the content rather than whether people can get at the content. And language is very important. So it's well worth looking at the guidelines GDS created and are up on the government website. Well worth it. And one of the things that came out of this, I mean, people take the mess out of the Plain English campaign with a small c, not the organisation, about the idea of dumbing things down. It's not about dumbing things down. Remember I said earlier about the heart of Agile is better communication. And we're using writing deliberately as a form of better communication rather than simply tapping people on the shoulder. So we need to make sure our writing communicates better. Otherwise, we're making things worse. And these principles here are well worth following. And yeah, they're talking about using active verbs here. It's active language. Very important. Well worth taking this stuff away and going to have a read about it. It's just, if you read the Gitflow documentation that's already up on GitHub for the existing extension that I wrote, it probably doesn't meet these guidelines. I haven't read it for a few years. I'm going to be reading this part of these live streams. It probably doesn't hold up very well to that. The story player documentation, 65,000 words of it, that's up there. That probably no one else has ever read other than me. Definitely doesn't meet this. This is something I'm having to learn. Even at this stage of my career, I mean, I've been doing this stuff for decades. It can always get better. We should never settle for what we can do today if there's a better way tomorrow. So that's a tangent, but yes, go look at this stuff. Go absorb it. Go play with it. There's all sorts of supporting material out there. Non-violent communication is a popular one. You can take some stuff from non-violent communication, but it goes further than I'm comfortable with myself for my projects. But non-violent communication is certainly another good background to go and read. Right, back to requirements. Right, so I'm just going to take a few moments to put some text in here, and then we'll start actually populating some epics and some stories. Right then, so I'm saying here that the core Gitflow branching model is designed to work anywhere. Yeah, that's fine. So I'm adding a reference here. References aren't fully implemented yet. So this probably won't work today, but it will work at some point. And it's very useful to actually... Another reason for doing this in a new tool rather than using Microsoft Word documents is it allows us to do things like cross-referencing far more naturally and easily. I've partially implemented it. There's some work to do in that. Right then. So something very simple, just very noddy. Well, yeah, it probably needs more paragraphs in the future. I'm just going to render this just out of curiosity. Still hasn't crashed, that's awesome. Right then, let's close that. Let's close that. We don't need those anymore. Let me rebuild this. So first of all, we can see that our glossary table is updated. We've got our new entries in. We'll skip these. They've already been built. Well, they're going to disappear in a moment. But we've got our new portable features section. So think of this as a chapter heading. If we had line breaks, or if this was split up into multiple pages, this would be a page heading. And you can see here we've got some links. They don't go anywhere at the minute. And you can see this reference, of course not Git host providing. Right. One moment. Right. Platform. Not provider, it's platform. So already what we're doing here is we're making sure our language is accurate and being used accurately. It's an underrated and often forgotten part of requirements. Oh, sorry. I'm alt-tabbing between things. I apologise if it's too fast. That's better. Right. So there's work to do to make these links actually go anywhere, but we're starting to build them up. That's very important. So we've got our heading here. So we're going to have PF1. And if we go back to my terminal for the moment, I'm going to open a new tab because we're constantly going to be coming back to this. I think just git hf. Yes, there we go. So I'm going to leave this here in a new in its own tab because I'm constantly going to be coming back to this. So we've got these here. These are our epics, I think. Being able to initialize, feature branches, releases, hot fixes, push and pull. So that's what we're going to do. And again, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to grab an existing file. And in a moment I'll be able to delete all those others because I'll have grabbed enough. I won't be worried about losing my examples. Alright, so this is Gitflow init description. An existing Git repository needs to be set up for the Gitflow branching model before any other right, so I'm thinking in my head, so you don't know, that might be a bit boring. So what I'm going to do here, before an existing Git repository can be used, a local existing Git repository can be used, Gitflow extension, it needs to be initialized. There we go. So our actors definitely going to be a Git binary, and at the minute that's it, because we don't actually do any pushing to remote systems, I believe. That may be wrong, we may come back to that. I'm going to leave myself as the stakeholder. Right. So we now need a story. Now I will freely admit, it's this approach here of dropping markdown files into the right place in a folder structure and then rendering them requires a bit of visualization and a bit of imagination. I'm used to working with what the final document looks like in my Word templates, so it's easy for me to imagine where things should be and and how they will look before I render it. But for anyone else who ever uses this tool in this condition, in this state, I can imagine this will be a big barrier to entry. So even though we're here to talk about Gitflow, I'm certainly thinking about how what I'm doing, the tooling I'm using, how it needs to change and evolve for people. Right, so that's our first requirement. So I'm just going to render that. Wrong tab. This tab here. Right, and now we've got our first story in our epic. Excuse me. So that there we've got a requirement that we can test against. And there's nothing more to it than that. So what does Git init allow us to do? Let's have a look. Right then. Ooh. So this, that's not what I wanted. Git HF help init. Git HF init. Right, so it gives us two flags, A and F. So what are those in terms of requirements? So we've got PF 1.2. No, we're going to do it this way. We'll work without non-interactive. We'll work. There we go. All right then. So. Right then. So notes on PF.2. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to explain what I mean by non-interactively. Use the Git HF's interactive. I can use Git init's interactive mode to change, things like default, things like branch names, like the branch names. Git HF init, not gift init. Mistake there. Git HF's users. Right. It's important that actively asking the developer to confirm their choices. So that Gitflow extension incorporated into automation or larger systems. So implications. A set of, right, so we'll need a set of default settings and override default settings via command line switches. So there we go. That's useful. Let me just render this and see what it looks like. I just want to wrong one again. Right, there we go. I'm going to be doing this a lot. I just wanted to see if I need to adjust these headings at all. Right, yes I do. Okay, so you can see here that my tool automatically adds one of these headings, so I don't need that. I just need this here. Right. I like to keep things tidy as I go along. It's not always possible, and as we get into the code, you'll see sometimes it can get a bit messy as I'm exploring things. But where it's obvious that we can make things tidy, let's do it. Right, there we go. So, ooh, that's a mistake. We'll come back to that in a moment. Yeah. So what I'm doing here is these are at this stage, these are more from my memory, and I'm also trying to find implied things. Now, the existing Gitflow extension already has defaults, but the only way to override them is to use the interactive mode, is to do git init -i for interactive. Can't remember what the flag is. I don't use it. So we actually don't have ways to do those via the command line switches. So that now gives us some more requirements to add. So let me go back here. You're going to see me do this a lot. Let me just highlight what this here that I've just highlighted. You're going to see me forget to put the HF in the middle quite a lot. Right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm feeling that interactive and non-interactive are two different epics. Instead of treating Git HF init as one epic, I think these are two different epics, and I'm going to split them up. Let me just look back at what I've got here. Yes, I think they are separate epics. Now, what I don't know is how much overlap there's going to be. So one moment. So when I'm faced with something like this, first of all, how did I come to the conclusion that there were two epics here? I've done enough requirements over the years to start to internalize my inner watchdog. Yeah, I'm going to use that phrase, inner watchdog. Inner observer, perhaps, is another way to think of it. I'm trying to observe what I'm doing as I'm doing it, but it's not always conscious thought. And the way that expresses itself is through how I feel about what I'm doing. Does it feel right? Does it feel complete? And in this case, it feels like the shape's slightly wrong, and there is another shape that would suit this particular data set, this set of requirements better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in place, see what it looks like, and then from there I'll decide whether or not it's the right shape to go forward. So there's some experimentation going along, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's what I'm going to do here. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So that's what I'm doing now. First of all, do we still have any viewers? Oh, we've got 3 viewers, and we've got a like. Thank you very much. For those of you who are watching, first of all, thank you for still being here. And secondly, is this interesting to you at all? Do you have questions about this that I can try and answer as I'm working through the stuff? Let me know, and I will, I'll break out and we'll do our best to answer those. But let me know. Certainly let me know if you're finding this useful and helpful. And if I'm going too fast, or it's too confusing as I'm jumping between windows, that kind of thing, please give me feedback so I can try and make the So all these live streams are part tutorial, and they're part me getting this work done. This is the only time I've got to do this work. Hence what I said last week about this. You know, it was roughly 30 sessions. There's roughly 45 to 90 hours on this project, and that's what I'm planning to spend on it. It's going to be every Monday night. So I've got to get through the work and get it done. But at the same time, it's important for me that it's also trying to be educational, if nothing else, because hopefully with the feedback, I'll learn as well. So, new file, pf 2.1.md. So I'm not going to put all the requirements in for getting it at this point. I'm going to put enough in that we can render it and see the shape and see what it looks like. So by default, it's going to be non-interactive. Now, what features can we do? So I'm going to put it in interactive mode so that we can see. So now I'm exercising the old code, and I could just read the code, but this is another way to do it, to actually see what features I want to capture. Right then. I'm going to go quite quickly through these. Okay, right. I am going to break out for a moment. Looks like the comments lag is still about a minute. Now I've actually got this stream set up to be low latency with the streaming software, so I'm wondering if this is I don't know whether the comments sat on YouTube for a minute before it reaches me, or whether it's the so I don't know if it's the streaming software that's slow, or just YouTube's not good for interactive. But let me add this in from Sam anyway, and let me make that a bit easier to read. See, so let me just move it up there. Right then. So thank you for the feedback. Sam says that they're more interested in the planning requirements process than the development process. It can be hard to find work examples of how that's done and what works well. Well, we're going to find out together whether or not it works well, because we're going to actually take these requirements and implement them and see how, and because they'll be version controlled under Git, when we're done, we'll actually be able to go back and see how the requirements have evolved as well. Something that's hard to do with Word. What we do with Word documents is we normally end up copying the damn things and saving them under different file names. Like we'll have, phase 1 requirements, phase 1.1 requirements, phase 1.2 requirements. So putting this data into Git may actually be the right place for it long term. We'll see. But thank you for that feedback, Sam. As always, much appreciated. There we go. Right, so I'm going to go back to working through these. So I'm creating the next one up. And this, right, so this requirement here I've written up, that the ---- prod flag to get HF init will set the branch that tracks production. I know what that means. It definitely needs more write-up, but I don't want to do that right now. That's something, so I'm definitely going to be coming back and improving these. So I'm guessing, right, yes. We're going to call that the integration branch. And we're going to say that's the branch. This is the develop branch. So these are just memos. And I know we're trying to move away from the term master branch. So yeah, so we're going to say that the integration flag will set the branch where features are integrated. So where feature branches are merged into when things are over. And this is where we'll expand on that further down. I'm sorry, I'm gesturing with my hands. You can't see that. I'm being silly. Right then. And these flag names aren't set in stone or anything. They're just placeholders. Da, da, da. Right. So at this early stage, I'm trying to find features to document as stories, and I'm also trying to find the shape of it. These are the two things going through my head all the time. Da, 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 da. Sorry, that one. Yeah, hotfix branches. Hotfix branches, rarely used but very important. Whenever you're designing a process, this is a tangent, I'm sorry. Whenever you're designing a process, you need your day-to-day process, sometimes called business as usual, but if it may just be your normal project process, but you also need your emergency process. And that's when everything's on fire and every minute matters. And you need to make sure that those processes work and that there's nothing in their way when the time comes. Hotfixes are a big part of that. It's one of the reasons I like Gitflow over GitHub flow. Commit to trunk and ship trunk all the time. That isolation means if I've got a production problem and I need to ship a fix, and that has happened in the past, no one ships perfect code. I certainly don't. Hotfixes allow us to do that safely. So it gives us some features. Support branches. Ooh, support branches. I'm going to ignore support branches. They're not actually part of the original Gitflow model. And I think I've got an idea for a better way to do them. They've never been fully implemented in this extension, so I'm going to ignore those. Version tag prefix. I forget about that one because I never... What are version tag prefixes used for? That might be used for some of the GitHub integration. Because I'm struggling to remember that one. There we go. Okay. So that's interesting. So the existing code, let me highlight this. What's caught my attention? This has caught my attention. The existing code attempted a push. Or attempted to do something to... Well, it actually says push to origin failed. So it attempted to push. So that means the init code does interact with the GitHub hosting platform. And because of that, that needs to be one of our actors. There we go. Right. So I am just going to nuke all these old example files that we're not using, so that when we render this, what we see is just the stuff we're doing for this project. Right, so let me render this. There we go. And then let's go over to our browser. Right. So now what we've still got our glossary. But now all we've got are domains for this project. So there's the PF1 is the stuff I started writing. with some notes rendering there. And now with PF2, we've got our non-interactive Gitflow init as an epic. And you can see it's starting to take shape now. Again, I need to make these render properly using Markdown. I need to go away and fix that for next week. Or the next time you see this document anyway. I'm going to be using this document a lot throughout this project. You see here, now we've got the different features that are available. And we've got, this is a requirement. The command will be non-interactive by default. So now we're the epic's starting to take shape. All the other stuff doesn't render yet, so we're not going to worry about that. But each of these are stories that you could now start to put into a project management system or a ticketing board like Jira. And then they can break them down into tasks to assign to people. And that's what requirements allow us to do. Now, I said I was about shape. So what I want to do, let me get over here. Let's copy these, PF2. I'm going to paste them in and rename them as PF3. So what I'm doing here, remember we're exploring the shape at the minute, and this is the interactive. Can be used interactively on the terminal. So I'm just going to modify these existing ones. So you'll notice there's quite a bit of copy and paste in my way I do things. There's nothing to worry about that. Now, do we need these flags? I think so. We'll set the default answer. Yeah. Now the language there is horrible. The get hf init -a ---- prod equals branch name flag will set the default answer for the branch that tracks production, master branch. That language is awful. It absolutely needs rewriting, and that's something I will have to come back to. But for now, what's more important to me at this stage is to get enough on the screen when I render this for me to see whether or not the shape makes sense. Default answer. YAML for you. Joys of YAML. So I'm just blasting through this. The default answer to a question of. So this language is utterly not meeting the goals I set earlier. I can't pretend otherwise. But I'm going to need to think. I need to think a bit more about how to structure that. The default answer to the question of right. -a. Sorry, in my head I'm trying to think of new wording of the prefix. default answer to the question of the... Right. Really do excuse the language. And what I can do now is if I can render this, I can now see interactive Gitflow. Does it make sense to have that separate from non-interactive? I think it does. That feels better to me. Doesn't feel quite right. Because internally these two things flow into the same code. Ultimately, we're just gathering information first. But that's what I'm going to use PF1 to solve. So if I go back to PF1 for a moment and then close others. There we go, that tidies things up a bit. Too many tabs open. Right. So we've got non-interactive. And then we are going to go here, which is 0.3.md. Command will be interactive. So I'm starting to duplicate requirements here, and that's certainly giving me pause for thought. I don't like duplicated requirements. Are a bit equivalent of a code smell, if you like. They're saying to me that there's a problem with the structure. I'm just going to render this, but that, you know, I've done, you know, where I'm going here isn't good. So what I'm going to do is PF 1.2 and 1.3 are going. They're handled elsewhere. What we're going to do is look at what actually happens. So I'm going to take this. This is the write-up for PF 1.2. I'm going to stick it in PF 2.1, which is the actual requirement for non-interactive, so that when I delete the file, I don't lose anything. So I can get rid of all of that, or I can. I'm going to get the right focus. Right. Okay. I'm going to put a bunch of these kind of things in. Remember, it was doing a push. And the reason the extension was doing a push, he says from memory, having not read the code for a while, is because it creates all the branches necessary and then pushes them up to the remote so that they exist. So I'm going to very quickly put those in here. I'm using master and develop branches as placeholders at the minute. I do need to go and sort this out and find a better way to explain those. And then we want a new one here, PF 1.4.md. Now then, the reason I'm hesitating is where's it pushing to? At the minute, I believe the code always pushes to origin. We're going to have to look at the code and see, but is that what we want? Right, let's have a look at the code. Let me just set this to be shell script. Unfortunately, because VS Code's a Microsoft product, it treats all Unix shell scripts as having the same syntax, which isn't right. But anyway, so what do we do? Oh, we've got this force flag as well. Need to look at what that does. So here we go. And you can see for shell script it's pretty clean. I can't take credit for this. I have made changes, but the basic structure we inherited from when we forked the project. When I was at DataSift, we forked the project from upstream from Vincent's own repo. Right. So it does the asking thing. Does all the asking. Yeah, so Origin's actually hard-coded. I suspect it shouldn't be that hard-coded. I'm pretty certain that's supposed to be a variable. That got missed. So it's definitely going to Origin. That's what I'm doing here. Yeah, Origin's hard-coded. Right. Well, because we're trying to mimic the existing behavior, because we want this to be as close to a drop-in as we can manage, that makes this quite clear. Put that in a string. Right. I'm just thinking that the origin is needs to go in our glossary. That's what I'm thinking of. I'm going to put an entry for it. What is it? I'm going to stick it as a system for now. This is Git. Right, hang on. I want to make this clearer. Is the remote address. The Git binary pushes it out. Uploads to and downloads from. Something like that. Let's render that, see what that terrible words look like. Right. So now we've got origin in there. So as we use the term, it's interesting that needs vertical alignment. Okay, right. So I'm just looking at this, just thinking of the changes I need to make to the CSS, which is not for tonight. Right, so origin's captured. That's good, because I imagine a lot of people don't know what the origin. When we talk about origin in Git terms, that may confuse them especially if they're new to it. So that's important. So we've been streaming for almost an hour and 15 minutes. We're coming on an hour 10. And hopefully what you're seeing here is this constant iteration, this constant cycle. I'm putting something down, and as I'm putting it down, I'm observing it, and I'm examining my feelings on it, and I'm using those to guide me. As I was writing this text in front of us here, I was going, right, okay, where does it push to? Well, it pushes to, I went into the code, it pushes to origin. And that sets something off with my inner observer saying, okay, what is origin? What does origin mean to other people? Does it mean the same thing? Does it mean anything to other people? And that's what led me to say, well, I think this needs a glossary entry. And that's all I'm doing. There's no there's no magic to this. There are no silver bullets, as the saying goes. It's all iteration, bit by bit, trying things out, seeing how they look, seeing how they feel, seeing how they taste. However your brain's wired for feedback, until it feels okay. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for it to feel okay. We're not looking to feel great or amazing. We're actually looking for a more neutral feeling. That's what we're looking for. Not always manage it, but that's what we're looking for. Right, so we push all the new creator branches to origin. So if we go back to the requirements now, Gitflow init is starting to look a bit more sensible. PF1 is starting to look a bit more sensible. We're saying here what the command's going to do. If there is no master branch, and that's perfectly possible, it's going to go and create it. And I know we've got to change the word master, and we've got to come up with some easy language to say this is the branch that tracks production releases. Actually, let's put that language in and see what it looks like. So let me talking about it. Create the branch for tracking. Because we use these shorthands in Gitflow, we say master branch, develop branch, and because we know Gitflow, we know what those branches are meant to be. But let's see if different language works as well. Let's render that. Okay, that's not terrible. We've removed the term master, which is something we want to do anyway. Although historically, Git's default branch, it's when you create a new repo, is called master. You can now change that. It's now down to you. It's equivalent of Subversion's trunk in some ways, I guess, although not quite at the same time. So yeah, people will master and the master branch isn't always going to be there for everybody. It's not unusual to create a repo and have the develop branch as the default branch, and it's not unusual for the extension to run in a repo where develop branch is default. So yeah, so that works. We're now talking about branches by their purpose rather than by their handle. I feel okay about that. So those are our four main features that are our stories. Each of those, I'm just reading. What I'm doing now is I'm reading each of these to see whether or not I think they're testable. That's a specialist domain of mine, is QA and testing, for better or worse. So I'm looking at this and I want to make sure, see if it's testable, I'm confident it can be implemented. But just because it can be implemented doesn't mean it's testable. And the idea is every story you should be able to, what I'm trying to do anyway with how I capture requirements, I should be able to take a story in isolation and there should be a set of tests just for that story. As the code changes, the tests may change, but that doesn't mean, as commands are implemented in different ways, but they should always be testable. Where was I going with that point? I was trying to go with that point that implementations can change without requirements changing. If implementations change, tests change. That's where I was going with that. Right. So the hf init command will initialize an existing Git repo so that it can be used with the Gitflow extension. That's testable. We can take we can take an existing Git repo. We can run git hf init on it, and then we can see if the Gitflow extension works. So that's testable. That's good. If the branch for tracking production doesn't exist, the command creates it. That's testable. That's very testable. Same with the branch used for integrating features. That's very testable. And the fact that it's got to push all newly created branches to the origin remote, that's also testable. Okay, I'm happy with that. And then how we find out what those branch names are covered by PF2 and PF3. And while the language in here is terrible and really needs rewriting to be far better, we've actually, at least we've captured the requirement. And there's a VTag thing I've got to look into. I've got a sneaking suspicion we're going to lose those. But yeah, so what else do we need to do for init? And yeah, I'm well aware there's lots of other, init's one of the smaller features. There's lots of other commands we've got to pull apart. I'm clearly not going to be able to do all of those on the live stream. I'm clearly not going to be able to do them all, not just tonight. But I could easily spend the next 10 live streams just doing this. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to take the rest of the requirements away and work on them off camera so that we can start getting into the code. Because I imagine code is what a lot of the wider audience is here for. Don't know. Right then. So what am I'm just looking to see what else it does. Ooh, okay. And this is the reason I'm looking through the code. This is something I didn't realize it did. It makes sure that head exists. How would you be in a situation where there's no head reference? You remember, some of this code goes back 8 years. I'm pretty certain Vincent wrote some of this code back in 2012, or 2012 may have been when I forked it originally from Vincent. So this code could be even older. So I don't know whether, I don't remember seeing a Git repo that didn't have a head reference. Ah, okay. I've got an idea. Reading this code's giving me an idea. So let me create a new tab. All right then. So what I'm doing here is I've got an idea. I'm just going to check it. So we've got an empty repo with no commits in it whatsoever. Now what command does he do here? I say I'm assuming Vincent wrote this code rather than me. I don't remember writing this code. Okay. There is no head. Right. So this is needed for a completely empty repo. So this needs to be a requirement, because if we don't do this, if we forget to do this, our need here, let me scroll up. This here, a PF 1.1 won't be achieved. So now the question is, should this be a note for PF 1.1? Or should this be a story in its own right? Because it's testable, for now I'm going to give it its own story. There are arguments both ways. That's for sure. Right, I'm going to add some notes here. Right. So, how does this happen? So I'm writing some notes so we don't forget. Ba, ba, ba. Right, so and I believe Vincent's code. Okay, yeah. So without an initial commit, we can't. Is that true? Without initial commit, we can't. We can create branches without head. That's interesting. I'm just trying to think how those work. Right. That's what I thought. So, although... So this is a Git bug. We've just found a Git bug. Well, I believe it's a Git bug. Without head, if we create a new branch, Git tells us it's worked, but it hasn't. There's no branches. That's what we've just proven there. So we absolutely need head first. We need the head reference creating first. So that was here, wasn't it? I keep saying reference. We call them refs. Right, so we've got this note here. Now, let me compile this up. And let me pull this back up into the browser. So what we're starting to do here is we're starting to build a project memory. We're starting to build up things here to explain why requirements are the way they are, so that anyone else who wants to work on this project now and in the future, they don't need to come and ask me. They don't even need to make sure I've survived COVID or anything like that. They can read this document and they can go, all right, PF 1.5, why does that requirement exist? And now we've got some notes. That's why we write things down. That's why we do it. Very important. Now for tonight, I'm just going to keep going through the code. Right, so this is important. Sorry, I just noticed the comment on the line below is the comment's wrong, but the code thankfully is right. Oh dear. That could have been horrible. Anyway. See, it says ask the user for naming conventions after we've created all the branches. No, it is asking. Why are you asking people? Okay. So that's broken. It must have asked people earlier. Yeah, it's already asked for it. So it's asked for a few things. Instead of asking in one go and then creating everything, it asks and creates as it goes along. Not sure why you would do that, but that's what it does. We'll deal with that. I'll deal with that later as well. Right. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to capture this as a feature, making sure that when the git hf init command is over, the user's left on the integration branch. So, too many windows already. So sorry about that. I'll grab that one because it's smaller. Now, I'm not going to call them feature integration because that's too close to feature branch. I'm just going to call it the integration branch, I think. Right. This is feeling like we need some more language. Right. Where's 1.3 gone as well? I think what we use as shorthand for master and develop, I think these terms probably need defining in the glossary. Is my instinct, but I'm going to leave it for the minute. I think I'm going to leave it for the minute. Let's render this, see how we're going. There we go. Yeah, so that's okay. So you can see here how we're starting to build up all the things that it's got to do. Let's go back to the code. So one of the things it's doing is it's setting some flags. In your .git file, which you might not be aware of. Where can I show this? Here. In this empty repo we've done. Right, it's failed, but that's okay. I don't know if you're aware. Inside your Git repo, there's a file called there's a folder called .git, which is where Git stores all of its data. There's a file in there called config. Now this only exists in your local repository. It's never, as far as I'm aware, it's never pushed up to any of the Git hosting platforms at all. But we actually define some Hubflow stuff in here. Hubflow is what we called the Gitflow extension to make it easier to find, and because we were integrating it a little more closely with GitHub at the time. I'm going to keep the Hubflow name for now unless someone tells me there's a good reason why I shouldn't. Right, so we want these. We want these settings. I'm pointing at my laptop that you cannot see. There we go. We want these settings. I will get used to what the camera can see at some point. Right then, so we need some requirements for these. So what I'm doing here, just to explain this part of the process, this is detail. I'm trying to find little things that have to be just so, for lack of a better word. And I don't use these settings, these features at all. I'd completely forgotten they were there. But that doesn't mean someone else doesn't. And because I'm trying to make a drop-in replacement, I've got to find these little things, and I've got to make sure they're part of the requirements. Because if they're not in the requirements, they won't get implemented. That's the guiding light here. If they're not in the requirements, they don't get implemented. So let's do this. This feels like another epic. Is it really another epic? No, we're not going to make this an epic right now. 1.7.md, there we go, right then. Command. So what settings do we have? Bear with me a moment. Right, so we got that. ND. And we know it's called develop. What are the others? They are prefixes, right? So we've got branches and we've got prefixes. And I'm not sure these requirements are quite right because we don't just create them, we also reuse them. So that's something I need to think about. Prefix.feature. That's something I really want to think about. This is when we find out that my my story tracker code doesn't sort entries by human alphabet. I bet it's going to put 1, then 10, then .2, .3. It's going to do that old thing. You'll see in a minute. You'll see in a minute when I render this. That's that. Actually, do we care about the others? We need care. Yeah, hotfix. We want hotfix. Version tag I'm not convinced about. So I am actually very quickly I want to find out where this version tag thing's used, because if I don't need it, I'm dropping it now. Version tag. And how do I find that? Find in folder. Always get yourself a good editor that can do searching across a lot of things. hello. Version prefix. So we use that in here. Version. Right, we use it in one place. Ah, okay. V tag is needed. The version prefix. We actually do use it. We use it to make sure the tag doesn't already exist. I should really start using that. That was a safeguard there that I'd forgotten about. Okay, so that's cool. That is cool. 1.112. Yes. Let's rename that. Right then, for anyone who's watching live, hello. Oh, 5 of you. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna finish writing these up. I'm going to tweak the names of those command line switches. I'm going to render the results, and then that'll take me up to almost 9:30 UK time. And at that point, I'm getting close to finishing the stream for tonight. So we'll have been streaming 2 hours 15 at that point. So this is, if you like, this is your 5-minute warning. If there's anything you want to discuss with me, any questions you've got, or any feedback at all that you want me to talk about live on the stream, this is your 5-minute warning to get them into the comments. Thank you for the second thumbs up, by the way, someone. This is your 5-minute warning to get them into the comments. And around 9:30 my time. So I will stop. I will stop for the night. We'll answer those, and then we'll wrap it up. All right. That's what we're going to do. But it occurred to me, our switch names can be these settings. That would make perfect sense for them to be. So the principle here is alignment. Instead of having to translate names all the time, if you can use the same name everywhere, all throughout a piece of code, it makes code far more traceable and far more easy to maintain. But also, it means you've just got one concept. You don't have to worry about several different concepts, if that makes sense. Right, so we've got that. And I'm going to tweak this a little because. So what I'm thinking of here, we've said about how these terms master, is going to go away. So that means we don't want to bake the term right into our requirements. But we also want general requirement here. General requirement. Bear with me. We've got a new domain here. This will make sense. Can't type. It's late. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. We have. I can grab that one. I need to add. I'm pointing at the screen. I'm sorry, you can't see that. So existing. Right. Right, we've got a requirement here for backwards compatibility. Now I just need to, that's the file I'm looking for. And just dropping this in here. So those of you who have joined partway through, just to quickly explain what I'm doing. Over the weekend, I knocked up a very rough, very first version of a tool called Story Tracker, which will generate that HTML file I keep pulling up on the screen of requirements. And it's built from a mix of structured record, which we store in the front matter of a markdown document, and the rest of the markdown document can be used as general notes for that particular area. And we have domains, which are under domains sit epics, and under epics sit stories. And what I'm doing now is I'm adding a second domain, which I actually need. Let me just close the others. Too many tabs open. So rename. I'm going to call this BWC. I prefer to have 3-letter or 4-letter domains if possible. BWC for backwards compatibility. Right, and this one here is backwards compatibility. Introduction. Right, so I'm just adding a placeholder text to come back and rewrite later. Index, so you are backwards compatibility. Right. So what I'm adding here is this new area here is mostly going to end up being more of an aid memoir at this point. It's definitely going to need some work on it. But what I'm trying to do here is, as things emerge, is capture something. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage because we're going to go back and review it. I say we, I'm going to do it all off camera, I think. But my working process here is, if I don't write it down now, I'm probably going to forget to come back to it at a later date. And that could create a requirements gap that could bite me in the backside. Right. So I am actually going to do this. So upgrading existing Gitflow repos. Lastly, upgrading a repo that has already been initialized. Okay, it's 9:30 my time, by the way. There's been no comments or questions, so I guess we won't be doing that section tonight. But this is your last chance to get something in there just while I tidy this up. Creating a repo that has already been initialized for Gitflow. Right, just so we've captured that. And then this requirement here, command upgrade any existing hubflow.branch.master config entry to be Gitflow.branch.prod production. That's what I want. We're going to do this. If we're getting rid of master, I think we should get rid of develop as well. Flow branch.integration. There we go. So that's two new entries for us actually changing cool. I'll talk about that in a moment. Thank you. Right. Yep. So what I'm doing here is I'm adopting this language of trying to get rid of the term master. And what I'm doing is thinking the knock-on effects of that, and including the fact that it's actually in our configs at the minute. So if we now go to our requirements for the last time tonight, reload it. So our glossary table, we've ended up with 6 entries tonight so far. We probably need to add more as we go along. So, but we made a start on it, and that's what's important, is to make a start on it. We've now got our new backwards compatibility domain. And we've now got 2 new requirements where we're going to find these old config entries and we're going to rename the config entries themselves so that someone doesn't have to run git hf-init on a repo that has already been initialized, that they're already working. We're just going to silently upgrade them. And because that git config file only exists on that repo on that file system, it shouldn't cause any problems us renaming these things. Which actually, this requirement's wrong. Talking it through to all of you watching, both live and on catch up. It's whenever you run git hf at all, we have to do this upgrade. Because we don't want them to run init again. We do not want them to run git hf-init again. So we're going to capture that as our requirement. Why did that move? Oh, that's alright. Just wondering why is the text reflowed when I switch between those two. Let me just render that. So I'm getting something very useful out of tonight personally. Talking it through to the camera, to those of you live and those of you watching on catch up, is helping me improve my observation of what I'm doing, and it's helping me improve the quality of these requirements I'm capturing. So we now got this new backwards compatibility domain, and we have an epic for upgrading existing workflows. So that feels good. I'm happy with that. We've got our portable features. Aha, I did do it. And I have a problem. I'm doing a sort that's not human based. I've got to fix that. You see how it goes from 1 to 10, 11, 12 and then back down to 2. Classic mistake. Classic mistake. I've got to go away and fix that. We've got our behavior here for what we do when we do an init. We've got some initial language about about making sure Gitflow init is non-interactive, so that's possible. That's a feature we don't want to lose. And we've got some language here about Gitflow init being interactive as well, because that's another feature we don't want to use. But we've also set some flags, and these flags need to change as well. Let me do those now while I remember One of those, 3.2 onwards. Branch.production. Is that what I called it? What did I call it? Yeah, branch.production. Sorry, so I'm already checking the requirements to see what it should be. It's branch.production there. So if I go down to here in PF2, branch.production, branch.integration. I want to make sure these all line up. So unfortunately, with requirements, what you're one thing you've got to do is you've got to be able to hold quite a few things in your head when you're reviewing requirements, in order to spot problems where things are not consistent. What normally happens is a few things get through, and it's developers who are implementing things who spot the inconsistencies and come back to you and ask you whether the requirements need fixing. On larger projects, or on projects where those people doing the development are, I'm going to use the phrase, more at arm's length. They're not as tightly involved. They're not working across the wide range of the code base. Those problems can make it to production. Those inconsistencies in the requirements can get implemented and can make it all the way to production, especially if you don't have a solid QA stage of your work. So it's something to think about and keep in mind. So this could very easily have got out the door. This could very easily have gotten out the door and shipped. All right. So if I reload this now and we go down to PF3, interactive Gitflow. Yes, there we go. Our switches are now as consistent, much more consistent. That's good. And yes, it does mean some of these epics do mirror each other, and a few people might look at this and go, "Ugh," they don't like that. They might look at this and they may see duplication. But what we've done here is this is more of a better way to think of this is about rolling things up and unrolling them. What we're doing with the requirements is we're unrolling them. We're taking the implicit and making them explicit. And if things are explicit, they're less likely to get forgotten about, missed, or to only exist in somebody's head. Now I learned some of this from when I used to manage outsourced developers. We're going back 18, 19 years now. If you, or like for example, any of your bosses have tried to manage suppliers, you've probably seen, the classic one here in the UK is to offshore work to the Indian subcontinent. That's the classic example. And often what comes back is disappointing. The person who's offshored the work, what they get back isn't what they wanted. But when you dig into these situations, normally what's happened is the offshore team has done exactly what they've been asked to do. They've implemented the requirements. And the problems can normally, not always, but normally they can actually be traced back to the requirements having too much implicitness and not actually setting out clearly what the expectations were, what the code needed to do, what the screens needed to look like, that sort of thing. As a result, it's in poor communication. So what we're doing here, there's nothing to worry about with the fact that these section 2, PF2, and section PF3 look very similar. That is not a fault, it is not a smell. Quite the opposite. We're making sure, as we go through these stories on the when they're on the GitHub project board and we're actually implementing them and ticking them off, we'll actually be able to see that we're getting these things done and we're making progress and we're not forgetting stuff. Right. So by my clock, it's just gone 9:40 p.m. I'm just going to have a look at the last couple of comments and then we'll wrap this up for tonight. Okay. So I'm glad that those of you watching have found this interesting to see how it's done. And let me just share this comment. And let me go back to me. Oh. And when I do that, it takes it off the screen. Sorry about that. And let's move that down. There we go. It's a shame that the on-screen comment isn't linked to whichever camera's live. I'm going to see if there's a setting somewhere I can do for that. Right. Hard to organise information. Absolutely is. And I also agree that devs don't get to do it often enough. I'm very fortunate with my career. Everywhere I've worked, I've always ended up involved, whether that's what I was originally hired to do or not. I've always ended up involved in this, in capturing requirements and shaping stuff. And I've actually done it as a full-time job in several places. Done it as a permie, and I've also been brought into at least one company to do it as well on a contract basis. So I'm lucky I've had the practice. Now, one thing I'm going to do with this is hopefully put together a talk or two around what you've seen tonight, where we can actually try and encourage people to do this stuff. As my dear friend Lorenzo always tells me, hi Lorenzo, if you ever get to watch this, by the way, if something's hard, do more of it. Try it over and over and over until you get better at it. The sheer act of constantly trying something, especially if you're looking to learn, mindful practice as they say, helps you get better at it. But I'm glad the audience has found this boring, because I was originally, last week I said I was going to skip this because I was worried it wouldn't be interesting to everybody. Seems not to be the case. So thank you all very much. Right, that brings us up to pretty much 2.5 hours of streaming. I think that's a good length for today. What am I going to be doing between now and next week? I'm going to go away and I'm going to populate these requirements. Not talking out loud, I'm going to be able to go quite a bit faster. Probably about twice, once I'm in the knack of this, about 3 times faster. I'm going to try and get this done. There's a lot to do. If I go back to the laptop for a moment, and we go back to our list of commands, I've got to follow this process through. So I've done most of, I haven't forgotten there's another flag to do. I've done most of one of these, and there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Although it's just the version command, so that's really short. So the 6 more of these commands I've got to take apart and do the same process for. And if I tackle one of these every night for the over the next week, by the next live stream, I should be able to have a draft requirements document that we could actually version. I don't want to spend a second week doing requirements on the stream. I don't think that's what we're here for. So I think next week, what I'm aiming for is to do a requirements review. And what I mean by that is a read through of all the requirements and translate those onto the GitHub project board so that we actually have all of our tickets to implement. Might have the tickets on the board by then. I might do that offline, I'm not sure. Because watching me wrangle a board is even more boring, I would imagine, than me wrangling a requirements document. But we'll see on that. I may actually not have enough time. I may have to do it on the live stream. But that's what I'm going to aim to do next week for the live stream. So thank you to everyone who's left a comment tonight. Thank you everyone who's left a thumbs up tonight. If you haven't already, please do so. Please subscribe, ring the bell and all that good stuff. Thank you to everyone who watches this on catch up. And if you are watching it on catch up, comments should be open. The comments I'm talking about tonight are the live stream comments. There are, I believe if you watch it on catch up, you see a different set of comments. I'm still learning about YouTube and the difference between live stream and watching things back later on catch up. But please do leave a comment if you can. I'd love to know where you're from, what you do, and what you want to get out of this series of live streams. Have a great week, everybody. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you all next week.